My lifestyle determines my death style. I know there are lots of videos out there about Saint Anger, both critical and in defense. I'm not really here for all that, and I'm not going to try and watch them all before making this. Though what I want to talk about, I guess, would fall on the defensive side. But first, let's walk it back, because I never even owned any Metallica albums until later. Like many of my generation, I first heard Metallica on MTV. I liked the Black Album singles when they would come on, and when I saw the video for One on Beavis and Butthead, I thought it totally ruled. They weren't my favorite band on the air, but sure, I liked them. And at some point over time, I bought the original 4 albums on used CDs. When Load and Reload came out, I wasn't calling them posers or sellouts. I did think the switch to heavy modern rock resulted in songs that were a bit lukewarm, but I actually appreciated the aesthetic change-up and found that somewhat daring considering how puritanical metal fans can be. It was uncharted waters, and it very well could have been career suicide. They also put Andres Serrano's Semen and Blood 3 and Piss and Blood 26 artworks on the covers. Absolutely bonus points for that. Literal semen, blood, and urine mashed between glass. That's more metal than anything on the first 5 albums, and also is likely to alienate previously mentioned said puritanical metal fans. And many it did, trust me, I listened to them bitch about it. Load and Reload generated a lot of flack. People didn't like that they cut their hair, people didn't like that they changed their sound. Like, across the board, there was a lot of complaining. But the albums came out, they made their statement, and that was that. And then nothing happened for like 6 years. When Saint Anger was coming out, I remember hearing the bits about them wanting to make it sound like a bunch of guys playing in a garage again. Raw, a real Garage Days revisited. And then I remember hearing what everyone was saying about it when it did drop. They hated it. Mainly the snare. But also just that it all sounded horrible. I still didn't check it out right away, but at some point I got a cursory listen in from a used copy that came into the CD store at a listening station. A copy I did not buy. But I gleaned from the listen that it didn't sound anything like a band in a garage at all. It sounded like a bunch of bones and guts in a blender or something. I don't think I really cared much one way or the other. I just kind of laughed and scratched my head and moved on. Mainly I thought, okay, now I know what people were talking about. Sure, Lars' ringing snare with the snares off sounded like a pounding, pulsing wound, but the most surprising thing to me was actually the sound of the guitars. And they sounded like muddy, bubbling hot garbage oozing around it. Whether you're talking Kill 'Em All, Master of Puppets, or Load, Metallica guitars always sounded like razor blades ripping through the speakers. They're so exciting and fun, the tone is beautiful. Even if on Load a song is weak, the tone is ferocious. Metallica always sounded beautiful. And they were one of the best metal bands ever, one of the big 4 of thrash. And metal, of course, at its optimal, sounds beautiful. It's by nature beautiful music about ugly stuff. Big studios, great drum kits, huge drum sounds, Marshall amps, Ampeg bass cabs, ESP guitars, tube condenser vocal mics, classic high-end mixing consoles. Like, metal is immaculate. But isn't that weird? Yes and no. I mean, metal is fun, and immaculate ripping production is like driving a fast car or jumping out of a plane. Like, it's a good rush. But metalheads are by nature well-versed with great appreciation for ugly aesthetics in so much. They love ugly art, ugly movies, ugly books, all sorts of ugly stuff. And whether they mean to or not, what Metallica actually made with Saint Anger was the ugliest sounding metal album I'd ever heard. I wonder if they just said that instead of trying to tell everyone it was like a band of teenagers jamming in a garage. It would have, like, I don't know, prepared everyone better or something. But I don't know if they fully meant what happened either. It's all kind of operating on Andy Kaufman levels where you don't know what's real. When I first watched the documentary Some Kind of Monster, which documents the dysfunction and breakdown of the band in the process of making Saint Anger, I was for sure, the entire viewing, that it was exactly that. They were pulling an Andy Kaufman doing a real-life Spinal Tap, and they were geniuses. I thought that for all of like 6 hours, when I decided to get really stoned and watch it again in a late-night encore and bask in the glory of their genius, only to realize, in super stoned terror, that, oh wait, oh my god, they're not joking at all. These guys are lost. Very, very lost. And very, very dysfunctional. And that's where it all comes together in a muddle as ugly as the record itself. And it makes it just as hard to identify the weird ideas that worked versus the terrible ideas that were complete failures. There are people who might make the argument that Saint Anger is high art, that they intentionally and brilliantly engineered the ugliest metal album as a next level statement in their artistic progression deeper into elevated conceptualizing and self-awareness. I can entertain some of those arguments, and I think there was a part of them that was kind of trying for some of this stuff, but the whole end result was kind of a failure and an accident from my vantage point. I think they were trying for a garagey record. I think they were so distanced from teenagers in a garage, they got it all wrong. But my point is, it doesn't matter. Who cares? So what? It's abominably ugly. It's kind of better they didn't mean all of it, because if they'd succeeded at creating the ugliest album intentionally, it wouldn't be ripe with the stenches of its failures. It's the kind of thing that you can only fully succeed at by failing, and that really makes it something extra special. I only came around to listen to Saint Anger some in recent years, and like any challenging media, it is best consumed with active listening, the way you might consume one of the $1 million Basquiat's Lars sells by actively taking it in with your eyes, or the way you don't throw on Lars von Trier's Dancer in the Dark just to have something on. Now, don't get me totally wrong here, because Saint Anger achieved some successes. The lead single, Saint Anger, won a Grammy for Best Metal Performance, and it's a double platinum record. It's by no means a commercial failure, but part of that's because Metallica is too big to fail, and their status as metal royalty overshadows all of that. Like, I don't think that they won a Grammy because it's some super deep statement or achieved some new sonic milestone. I think it won a Grammy because Metallica put out an album and they're Metallica. It's not at all an accolade that's in recognition of the stuff I'm talking about here. I think it is just a lark. Because when Saint Anger was hitting the streets, all I heard was people ripping on it and talking about how much it sucked. The backlash was worse than Load and Reload combined. And I just wonder, why was the metal community so adverse to being served an ugly album? Why aren't there more ugly albums? In fact, the standard in the decades since has become to make metal albums almost surgically sterile. Either that or go the black metal route and make them sound like they were recorded with one microphone in a basement, or go the 70s route and make them sound like they were recorded all on vintage equipment with no computers. Metallica themselves even went back to good sounding albums, and that's fine. We don't need another Saint Anger, and they surely don't. But it's a cool moment in time, and a record I think, regardless of what they meant, raises a good question about heavy music and the way it is produced. Why do people who love dark and ugly themes want their music to be so slick and pretty? Why were they put off by something actually repugnant? For the first time, an album that embodied all the dysfunction, grotesqueness, and aggression came along, and I just kind of feel like everyone missed the point. But perhaps it's because it wasn't the point the band was trying to make. It was the point the music, and by that I mean heavy metal itself, finally did.